Some questions don't just demand an answer. They change history. The moment everything began, I was standing at the far end of the reception hall aboard the Meridian Ring, a neutral station drifting silently between four rival star systems. It belonged to no one, yet everyone claimed it as common ground. Above us, a vast ceiling of transparent crystal revealed the endless cosmos. Countless stars shimmered against the darkness, brighter than they ever appeared from any planet. Out here, untouched by artificial light, the galaxy felt infinite, ancient, and quietly alive. Around me, delegates from 11 different civilizations laughed politely, exchanged carefully chosen words, sampled strange alien delicacies, and pretended, for one evening at least, that centuries of rivalry could be forgotten. Just another diplomatic reception. Or so it seemed. A glass of something pale and chilled rested in my hand. I had barely tasted it. My attention wasn't on the refreshments. It never was. Years of diplomacy had taught me that the loudest voices rarely mattered. The truth was almost always hidden in the whispers, the pauses, the expressions people thought no one noticed. So I watched. I listened. And I remembered. Without the slightest warning, someone appeared beside me. Ambassador Morrow. I turned. It was Thessaly, a Valoran. She stood taller than most species, elegant feathers flowing along her arms and across her collar like a royal mantle. Every movement carried the calm confidence of a civilization that had not tasted military defeat in over 4 centuries. But there was something different about her. She was young enough that curiosity still outweighed caution, and honest enough that she hadn't yet learned how to hide what she was truly thinking. Her translator softened her voice into a gentle melody. "I've been studying your people quite thoroughly," she said. There was no arrogance, no accusation, only genuine curiosity. I looked into her eyes, and in that quiet moment, I realized she was about to ask a question that countless civilizations had wondered, but none had ever dared to ask aloud. "I've been studying your people quite thoroughly." A faint smile crossed my face. "That's very kind of you," I replied. She gave a small shake of her head. "It isn't kindness. It's professional curiosity." For a brief moment, she tilted her head, the unmistakable Valoran gesture that usually meant one thing. She had been holding this question back for a long time. "Humanity has been a member of the Conclave for 212 years, she began. "In all that time, not a single empire, not a single military alliance, not a pirate fleet, not even a rogue colony has launched a serious attack against Earth or any human settlement." She paused. "Not once." "I know," I answered calmly. She continued, her golden eyes never leaving mine. "Your official military budget is smaller than the Olari merchant guilds. Your colonies are scattered across dozens of systems. Your registered warships are old. By every strategic measurement available, humanity should have been raided, conquered, or absorbed into a stronger power decades ago." Another pause. "But none of that has happened." She drew a slow breath. "So I'd like to ask you directly. Why?" The room didn't fall completely silent. Not officially, but I noticed things. I always notice things. 3 nearby delegates quietly ended their conversations without appearing to. 2 others suddenly found the decorations on the opposite wall incredibly interesting. And across the reception hall, Vorath, the massive CRE representative. Officially, he was nothing more than a cultural observer. Unofficially, everyone knew better. The broad-shouldered giant shifted ever so slightly toward us, listening carefully, because everyone in that room wanted the answer. For over 2 centuries, countless governments had asked that question behind closed doors. Military analysts, intelligence agencies, admirals, politicians, entire civilizations had tried to solve the same mystery. Why had no one ever dared attack humanity? Thessaly. She was simply the first person brave enough to ask me directly. I looked into her steady golden eyes. She didn't blink. Remarkable, really. Valorans blinked often, rapidly, constantly, but not now. She waited, patiently, fearlessly. Finally, I smiled. "That," I said softly, "is an excellent question." Then I calmly lifted my glass and took another sip. Thessaly waited. She didn't speak. She simply watched me, expecting the answer she had spent years searching for. I let the silence linger for a moment, then calmly took another sip from my glass. Nothing more. A soft, frustrated sound escaped her lips. Her translator rendered it as a gentle chime. "You're not going to answer, are you?" A faint smile touched my face. "Oh, I will answer." I set the glass down carefully. "Just not tonight." She studied me with those sharp, golden eyes, searching for something hidden beneath my calm expression. "When?" she asked quietly. I looked past her, through the transparent ceiling, toward the endless sea of stars stretching across the darkness. "When the answer becomes relevant." At the time, neither of us knew that relevant was only 48 hours away. The following morning, the conclave gathered as it always did. On the surface, it was another ordinary session. The Sarati and the Chedrani argued over disputed border systems. Trade representatives debated mineral rights along the outer lanes. Committees revised agreements. Delegates voted. Lawmakers complained. History, as usual, disguised itself as routine paperwork. I took my assigned seat near the back of the chamber. Humanity had joined the conclave relatively recently, and seniority determined where each delegation sat. The oldest civilizations occupied the front. The newest observed from behind. I reviewed documents, made notes, cast my votes on routine matters. To everyone else, I looked completely absorbed in the day's agenda. But I wasn't watching the negotiations. I was watching Vorath. And he was watching me. The CRE Empire had stood as the greatest military power in the conclave for nearly 300 years. They had earned that reputation through overwhelming technology, unmatched discipline, and a willingness to use both whenever necessary. They rarely started wars. They didn't have to. Their strength alone was usually enough. When the CRE declared that something was non-negotiable, most civilizations adjusted their policies without argument. It was simply easier that way. Every species had learned that lesson. Every species. Except humanity. Not because we had openly defied them, but because, somehow, they had never demanded anything from us. That fact alone had troubled Vorath for years. I had read portions of the intelligence reports our analysts managed to acquire. He was patient, methodical, careful. He wasn't searching for weaknesses. He was trying to understand humanity itself, piece by piece, observation by observation. He believed he was finally close to solving the mystery. I couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of amusement, because despite all his intelligence, despite years of careful study, Vorath still had absolutely no idea who we really were. And very soon, he was about to find out. When the conclave session finally came to an end, I made my way back through the residential ring in silence. The station's corridors were calm, illuminated by soft white lights that reflected against polished metal walls. Beyond the observation windows, the stars drifted slowly past, indifferent to the affairs of diplomats and empires alike. Footsteps echoed behind me. Then another set matched my pace. It was Owen, my aide. Only 26 years old, born in a quiet city in the north of England, Owen possessed a rare quality that couldn't be taught. He understood when to speak. And, more importantly, when not to. "There's a communication flag waiting on your terminal," he said. "Earth Defense Coordination." He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Priority green." I gave a small nod. "Thank you, Owen." He glanced at me. "Would you like me to stay?" "No." A faint smile crossed my face. "That won't be necessary." Without another word, he nodded respectfully and disappeared down the adjoining corridor toward his own quarters. I entered my room alone. The terminal was already waiting. One encrypted message. I opened it. It was short, precise. A CRE scout squadron, 7 vessels in total, had altered course nearly 18 hours earlier. Their new trajectory pointed directly toward the Kepler-22 system, humanity's third-largest colony, a peaceful world, home to more than 340,000 people, farmers who worked rich fields beneath gentle skies, engineers building tomorrow's infrastructure, students filling the classrooms of a growing university, doctors caring for families across 3 modern hospitals. It wasn't a military fortress. It wasn't a strategic weapons depot. It was simply... But the report continued. The CRE fleet had filed no flight plan. They had opened no diplomatic channel. They had requested no permission from the conclave. By every interstellar protocol, their approach was illegal. Yet they continued forward, silently, deliberately, toward a world where human families lived. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the report for a long moment. There was no anger, no panic, only certainty. Finally, I opened a secure channel back to Earth Defense Coordination. I typed 4 words. I want them contained. The message disappeared into the encrypted network. 11 minutes later, a reply arrived. Just 3 words. We see them. Nothing more. Nothing needed to be added. I closed the terminal. There was only one person I needed to speak to. Finding Thessaly wasn't difficult. She was exactly where I expected. The observation lounge on the station's upper ring. At this hour, the room was almost empty. 2 Sarati delegates spoke quietly near the panoramic window while the endless sea of stars stretched silently beyond the glass. I crossed the room and took the seat opposite her without asking permission. Then I placed both hands calmly on the table. She looked at me immediately. She saw something different in my expression. Something had changed. I'm ready, I said quietly, to answer your question. For a moment, she simply stared at me. Then her voice became almost a whisper. Something has happened. I met her eyes. No. I paused. Something is happening. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us felt heavier than words. Finally, Thessaly broke it. The CRE. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I offered no confirmation, no denial. There was no need. She was an exceptional diplomat, and she had undoubtedly been monitoring fleet movements just as carefully as I had. Slowly, she unfolded her hands on the table. For the first time since we'd met, the confidence that usually surrounded her seemed to fade. She no longer looked like the proud representative of an undefeated civilization. She looked young, thoughtful, uncertain. She took a slow breath before asking the question that truly mattered. How much trouble is my species in? I studied her for a moment before answering. If this situation ends badly for humanity, I said quietly, the Valoran home system borders CRE territory on 2 sides. I paused. So yes, that's a very reasonable question to ask. Her eyes never left mine. I leaned forward slightly. Ambassador Thessaly, I'm about to tell you things about my people that don't exist in any archive you've ever read. Things that were never included in the Conclave's records. When I'm finished, I believe you'll see the next few days very differently. She searched my face, looking for any hint of exaggeration. She found none. At last, she gave a slow nod. All right. Outside the observation window, the stars drifted silently across the endless darkness. Then I began. I'll tell you about Earth. Not the polished version diplomats present during first contact. Not the carefully edited history distributed through conclave databases. The real Earth. The real story. I spoke of a world unlike any other. A world where history had never followed a straight path. Every civilization in the conclave had eventually reached a defining moment. A point where competing nations united into one people. Some united because an outside enemy forced them together. Others discovered that cooperation simply came naturally. For many species, peace became inevitable. Humanity was different. We never united that way. We fractured. Then we rebuilt. Only to fracture again. Kingdoms became nations. Nations became rivals. Alliances were forged. Only to be broken. Again and again. We invented extraordinary technologies. Some transformed civilization. Others existed for one horrifying purpose: to destroy one another more efficiently than ever before. And when those terrible weapons were finally used, we used them on ourselves. Entire cities vanished beneath the fires of our own creation. The world looked into the abyss. And yet, we didn't disappear. We mourned. We endured. We rebuilt. Then we rebuilt again. And after everything, humanity kept moving forward, kept learning, kept creating, kept surviving. I looked across the table. Thessaly hadn't moved. She sat perfectly still, absorbing every word. The expression on her face was no longer curiosity. It was understanding. Slowly, painfully, she was beginning to realize that humanity's greatest strength had never been our ships or our weapons. It was the simple fact that no matter how many times history tried to break us, we had always found a way to stand again. Thessaly remained silent. Her golden eyes never left mine. She wasn't simply listening anymore. She was trying to understand. I leaned back slightly and let the quiet settle between us before speaking again. The greatest mistake every civilization makes about humanity, I said softly, is looking at our history and seeing only chaos. They see endless wars. They see nations rising and falling. They see a species that came dangerously close to destroying itself more than once. I paused, and they come to the same conclusion. That we're dangerous because we're unstable. That we're unpredictable. That we're a broken machine capable of hurting anyone standing too close. I slowly shook my head. They're wrong. Thessaly spoke for the first time in several minutes. Not wrong. She tilted her head thoughtfully. Incomplete. A faint smile crossed my face. Exactly. I looked out through the observation window, watching a small service vessel glide silently across the stars. We aren't dangerous because we're reckless. We aren't dangerous because we enjoy conflict. We're dangerous because we've lived through enough disasters that we stopped being surprised by them. We've seen civilizations collapse. We've watched economies fail. We've survived famine, disease, wars, and tragedies beyond counting. So when another crisis arrives, we don't panic. We adapt. We endure. Because we've done it before. And every single time, we survived. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Outside, the service craft disappeared into the darkness. Then Thessaly broke the silence. You said there were things about humanity that aren't recorded in any conclave archive. There are. I folded my hands together. 40 years after humanity first joined the conclave, the major governments of Earth reached an agreement. She frowned slightly. A military alliance? No. A defense treaty? I smiled gently. No. It was something much simpler. What kind of agreement? A promise. Her feathers shifted ever so slightly. I continued. We created a signal system. And we made a decision. A decision about what the galaxy would see. And what it never would. She waited patiently. When humanity first encountered the conclave, I said, our leaders studied every major civilization. They noticed something. Whenever another species felt threatened, they displayed their strength. They moved their largest fleets to the border. They unveiled their newest weapons. They wanted every potential enemy to understand exactly what they were capable of. I paused. Our leaders looked at that. Then they looked back at 10,000 years of human history. And they reached a completely different conclusion. Thessaly whispered. What did they decide? I met her eyes. They decided to show almost nothing. Confusion flickered across her face. They let the entire galaxy believe it had already seen everything humanity possessed. I nodded slowly. There's an important difference between hiding your strength and convincing everyone there isn't any more to find. A species that's hiding looks suspicious, but a species that appears completely ordinary is rarely questioned. We didn't pretend to be weak. We simply allowed everyone else to underestimate us. The realization struck her all at once. She stared at me. So the CRE fleet is about to discover what happens when that assumption is tested. For the first time that evening, I didn't smile. I simply nodded. Yes. The observation lounge fell completely silent. The two Sarati delegates who had been speaking near the far window quietly left the room, leaving only the distant hum of the station's life support systems. After several long seconds, Thessaly asked one final question. It wasn't spoken with fear. It was spoken with certainty. You're not worried? I considered my answer carefully. Then I looked back at the stars. No. I'm attentive. There is a very important difference. She held my gaze, and I watched the moment everything she believed about humanity quietly rearranged itself. She hadn't been asking the wrong answer. She'd been asking the wrong question. The real question had never been, why has no one ever attacked humanity? The real question was, what has humanity been quietly preparing for all this time? Thessaly opened her mouth to speak, but before a single word could leave her lips, my communicator chimed. A soft tone. Come. Ordinary. Yet somehow, it carried the weight of history. I glanced down at the display. The message was short. The CRE fleet had crossed the outer boundary of the Kepler 22 approach corridor. For a brief moment, neither of us spoke. I slipped the communicator back into my pocket and rose from my chair. "Forgive me," I said quietly. "I need to make a call." Thessaly remained seated. She didn't try to stop me. She simply watched as I walked away, the endless stars glowing behind her. She looked like someone who had just discovered that the ground beneath her feet was far stronger and far deeper than she had ever imagined. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. I spoke only 3 words, nothing more. Then I ended the transmission, returned to my quarters, and went to bed. I slept well. The next morning, everything changed. The news reached the Meridian Ring before breakfast. I was standing in the small kitchen of my quarters, preparing coffee the same way I had every morning since I was 19 years old. Simple, unchanged, a familiar ritual in an unpredictable universe. A knock sounded at the door. Before I could answer, Owen stepped inside. One look at his face told me everything. He wasn't frightened. He was stunned. "They stopped," he said quietly. Without a word, I finished pouring my coffee. Then I looked at him. "Tell me." The CRE Scout fleet crossed the outer boundary marker at 0340 station time. They continued for approximately 40,000 kilometers. And then they stopped. He hesitated. "They're just sitting there. No damage. No distress calls. No movement. The conclave observers have been trying to contact them. They aren't responding." I carried my coffee to the table beside the window and calmly sat down. Outside, the stars were exactly where they'd been yesterday. Exactly where they had been for millions of years. Unmoved. "What are the observers reporting?" I asked. Owen took a slow breath. "They believe every CRE vessel is fully operational." He swallowed. "But there are targeting locks." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind?" His expression grew even more uncertain. "The kind that shouldn't exist." He looked down at his tablet before continuing. "The colony's automated cargo platforms. The atmospheric weather stations. The university telescope array. They're all generating weapons-grade targeting signatures." He looked up. His voice had become almost a whisper. "Ambassador, even the weather satellite network is locking onto the CRE fleet." For several seconds, I simply sipped my coffee. Owen shifted uneasily. His training had prepared him for diplomacy, for negotiations, for political crises. It had not prepared him for weather satellites capable of targeting warships. Finally, he asked the question he'd been holding back. "Sir, should I be worried?" I looked at him calmly, then smiled. "No." I lifted my coffee once more. "You should finish your breakfast." He searched my face for signs of concern. He found none. Something in my expression settled him. His shoulders relaxed. He gave a respectful nod, then quietly left the room. Alone once again, I finished my coffee, because I already knew this wasn't the beginning of a war. It was the moment the galaxy was about to discover exactly why humanity had never needed one. After finishing my coffee, I made my way to the conclave observation suite. By the time I arrived, the room was already crowded. Delegates from across the galaxy stood in small groups, speaking in hushed voices. The atmosphere was tense, charged with uncertainty. Everyone had heard the reports. Everyone wanted answers. At the center of the chamber, a massive tactical display projected a live feed from the Kepler 22 approach corridor. And on that screen, 7 CRE warships hung motionless in space. Silent, still, like predators that had suddenly realized they were no longer the hunters. Across the room stood Voreth, the mighty CRE representative. His arms were folded tightly across his chest as he stared at the display. But something had changed. 2 days earlier, he had carried himself with the quiet confidence of an empire that had dominated the stars for centuries. That confidence was gone. Now there was tension in his posture, a stiffness, the first hint of uncertainty. And for the CRE, uncertainty was a rare thing. "Ambassador." I turned. Thessaly had moved to my side. There was no greeting, no small talk. She went straight to the point. "Jump drives." I looked back at the display. The entire fleet attempted simultaneous jump activation 40 minutes ago. I remained silent. The drives engaged, she continued, then shut down. Again. And again. Every attempt failed. She studied my face. Something is suppressing their jump capability. The field extends across a distance our instruments can't fully measure. Her voice lowered. The Chadrani technical teams believe the source is centered on the colony itself. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she added quietly, the Ulari spent 60 years trying to create a jump suppression field. They never managed one larger than a few hundred meters. I know, I said. Her eyes narrowed. Does humanity possess one that functions across 40,000 kilometers? I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I continued watching the tactical display. The 7 Sierra vessels floated helplessly in the darkness. From this distance, they looked strangely insignificant, like 7 tiny lights abandoned in an endless ocean. Finally, I spoke. Kepler, 22 is a farming colony. Thessaly blinked. What? Mostly farmers. Some engineers. A university. 3 hospitals. She stared at me. Ambassador, that isn't an answer. No, I said calmly. It's context. Her expression tightened. I continued. 340,000 people. No registered warships. No military installations listed in conclave records. Limited resources by interstellar standards. I paused, then looked directly at her. And every single thing built in that system was built with the understanding that one day it might be required to do far more than its official purpose. The words hung between us. Heavy, uncomfortable. Slowly, realization began to appear in her eyes. Around us, delegates continued whispering nervously as new data poured into the observation center. On the display, one of the CRE's ships attempted a cautious lateral maneuver. For a brief moment, it drifted sideways. Then the screen erupted. Hundreds of targeting indicators appeared around the vessel. Not from warships. Not from defense platforms. From everywhere. The lock signatures wrapped around the ship like an invisible net. A warning. Clear. Precise. Undeniable. Seconds later, the vessel quietly returned to its original position. Across the room, Vorith unfolded his arms. Then folded them again. A tiny movement, but one that revealed more than words ever could. Beside me, Thessaly swallowed slowly. Her voice was almost a whisper. Every human-built object in that system. She hesitated. Is armed. I allowed myself a small smile. That's an oversimplification. She looked at me. I nodded slightly. But it isn't inaccurate. Silence followed. A deep silence. The kind that comes when an impossible truth suddenly becomes impossible to ignore. Because for the first time, the galaxy was beginning to understand something humanity had never bothered to explain. The farmers of Kepler, 22 weren't helpless civilians protected by hidden defenses. They were the defenses. And anyone foolish enough to threaten their home was about to learn the difference. Thessaly stood frozen. Her eyes remained fixed on the tactical display, yet I could see the questions racing through her mind. She had begun to understand, but she still hadn't grasped the full picture. I kept my gaze on the 7 silent CRE warships. They're farmers, I said quietly. They grow food. They raise families. They teach children. They build homes. I paused. But every single thing a human being builds is designed with one unspoken assumption. One day, it may have to become something more. The words hung in the air. No one in the observation suite spoke. Everyone was listening now. On the display, one of the CRE ships attempted a slow lateral maneuver. It barely moved. Then suddenly, the tactical feed exploded with warning icons. Hundreds of targeting locks appeared around the vessel, like an invisible web tightening from every direction. The ship stopped instantly. Moments later, it drifted back to its original position. Silence returned. Across the room, Vorith slowly uncrossed his arms, then crossed them again. For the first time, the representative of the most powerful military empire in the conclave looked uncertain. Thessaly finally found her voice. So, she swallowed. Every human-built object in that system is armed. I allowed myself a faint smile. That's an oversimplification. I looked back at the display. But it isn't inaccurate. The weight of those words settled across the room. No one argued. No one laughed. No one even breathed very loudly. A nearby conclave observer vessel had begun a full planetary scan of Kepler-22. The results started appearing across a secondary display. One of the Chadrani delegates stepped closer. He read the report once, then read it again. His expression changed. He quietly whispered something to the colleague beside him. Both of them slowly turned and looked directly at me. I didn't react. There was nothing surprising in the report. I already knew exactly what it contained. It showed an ordinary colony beginning an ordinary day. Farmers driving machinery across open fields. Children hurrying toward school. University students filling lecture halls. Doctors beginning their morning rounds. The local bakery preparing its first fresh loaves before sunrise. Life. Exactly as it should be. But the report revealed something else. Something no conclave database had ever expected to find. 34% of the colony's adult population carried personal weapons capable of penetrating military-grade armor. Not soldiers. Not security forces. Ordinary civilians. Farmers. Teachers. Mechanics. Engineers. Parents. The scan continued. 22% of all adults held certifications that the conclave translation systems struggled to interpret. The closest translation they could produce was advanced threat neutralization, an awkward phrase, an incomplete phrase, because no alien language truly possessed the words to describe everything those people had learned, or everything they were prepared to do. The screen displayed simple statistics, cold numbers, but behind every number stood a human life. A neighbor, a parent, a teacher, a friend, people who looked completely ordinary, because they were. And yet, over generations, quietly, without speeches, without parades, without ever calling themselves soldiers, they had become something else entirely, not because they expected war, but because history had taught humanity one lesson: hope for peace, prepare for everything. The observation suite had fallen completely silent. No one spoke. No one moved. Every delegate stared at the scan results as though the numbers themselves had become impossible to believe. Thessaly's eyes remained fixed on the display. These. She spoke almost in a whisper. These are civilians. I nodded. Yes. Her gaze moved back to the report. A third of them are carrying weapons capable of penetrating the armor of a starship. They're personal sidearms, I replied calmly. Standard equipment on most human colony worlds. She looked at me in disbelief. Standard? I gave a small nod. The distance between settlements can be unpredictable. She looked back at the report. And 22% of the population is certified in. She stopped, reading the translation again. Advanced threat neutralization. I smiled faintly. It's a certification. Most people earn it around the same time they qualify for their agricultural licenses. For several long seconds, Thessaly simply stared at me. The feathers along her collar slowly lifted. I had come to recognize that gesture. It wasn't fear. It was something far deeper. The quiet shock that comes when the true size of something suddenly comes into focus, and you realize it is far larger than you ever imagined. She finally looked up. On Earth, are there places where every household is required to keep weapons? There are. I answered without hesitation. Several. Her eyes widened. Is that a military policy? No. I smiled gently. It's simply how some communities choose to live. She hesitated. Then came the question. In case of what? I was silent for a moment. My thoughts drifted far beyond the stars, back through thousands of years of human history, to ancient battlefields, to burning cities, to families forced to defend their homes, to neighbors protecting neighbors, to every generation that had learned survival the hard way, and passed that lesson to the next. Humanity had spent 10,000 years discovering just how dangerous people could be. But we had also spent 10,000 years proving something even greater, that no matter how many times we were tested, we endured. I looked back at Thessaly, then quietly answered, in case. 2 simple words. Yet they carried the weight of our entire history. At that exact moment, a new alert flashed across the tactical display. An intercepted transmission. Encrypted. Origin. The CRE fleet. Immediately, the Chadrani technical delegate hurried across the room carrying the decoded message. He leaned close to the oldest delegate present, Yunval. The ancient Sarati had witnessed more turning points in conclave history than anyone still alive. She listened in complete silence. Then, slowly, she lifted her eyes. Not toward the display. Toward me. There was no fear in her expression. No surprise. Only recognition. The look of someone whose quiet suspicion had finally become certainty. I returned the gesture with the smallest nod. She answered with one even smaller. No words were needed. Beside me, Thessaly hadn't heard the intercepted message. But she was watching the room. Watching faces. Watching reactions. She was putting the pieces together faster than anyone else. What did it say? She asked softly. I haven't read it officially. I replied. But you already know. I remained silent. Instead of answering, I turned toward the main display. Something had just appeared. Without warning, a massive vessel emerged from empty space. No jump flash. No sensor warning. One heartbeat. There was nothing. The next. It was there. Less than 200 meters from the CRE flagship. The room froze. The ship was enormous. Far larger than anything in the CRE fleet. Far larger than anything officially listed in the Conclave registry. Its hull was smooth, silent, almost elegant. There were no visible weapons. No missile bays. No cannon arrays. Nothing that suggested violence. It simply existed, as though it had been watching the entire encounter from the shadows, waiting patiently for the exact moment it wished to be seen.